Hard-hitting interviews with newsmakers and personalities from across the globe. This is BBC World and Hard Talk.
Israel is tightening the noose around the neck of Gaza by blocking fuel supplies. Israel's adamant the Palestinian territory, run by Hamas since its violent coup last summer, will get the bare minimum, whilst the Islamic militants remain in charge. My guest on Hard Talk today is a supporter of Hamas and author of a book on the group, a Palestinian-born academic now living in Britain. Dr. Azzam Tamimi, welcome to Hard Talk. This is an important moment in Middle East peace. President Bush says he has renewed zeal. He says there'll be a peace deal in a year's time by the time he leaves office in January 2009. Do you share that confidence?
Not at all. I don't think that Bush came to the region for peace. I think he came for his own purposes. He came in order to sell the Gulf countries more weapons for no use whatsoever, and to give a green light to Ehud Olmert to hit Gaza hard.
Peace would require both sides to compromise, of course. Do you think Hamas wants to compromise?
Well, peace would require negotiations, unconditional negotiations. Israel is adamant it would not talk to Hamas, and so long as Israel is unwilling to talk to the representative of the Palestinian people, you are sure not to have peace.
But there are reasons for that, of course. Hamas still believes in the armed struggle against Israel and still believes that Israel should not exist.
Well, in every conflict, if you want to end the conflict, you talk to those you are fighting or those who are fighting you. This is the case in the Vietnam War. This was the case in South Africa. This was the case in the Northern Ireland conflict. Hamas believes in something. Israel believes in another. If we want to end the conflict, they have to talk.
But I suppose if you quote there Northern Ireland, and in that case the IRA had to renounce the armed struggle. It had to decide it was going to allow Sinn Féin, its political representatives, to negotiate without the threat of the gun or the bomb.
That was the result of negotiations rather than a precondition to negotiations. It's not true at all that the IRA agreed to any conditions before sitting down and talking to the British government.
But for it to really proceed, there had to be the end of armed struggle.
Well, eventually you're going to reach peace, but there have to be peace on both sides. It's the Israelis who are occupying Palestinian land and not the other way around.
If there is to be peace, though, it's going to require both sides to recognise each other, isn't it? Hamas will have to decide it is going to recognise Israel if there's to be any step forward.
No, this issue of recognition is naive and is childish. You see, for the Palestinians, it's impossible to recognise that what happened to them in 1948 was legitimate, was right. We were dispossessed. The Jews came from Europe to solve their own problem in Europe and to solve the European problem at the expense of the Palestinians. If my mother was dispossessed of her home, my father of his land, and millions of Palestinians suffered the same fate, how can it be right? We cannot recognize that as legitimate.
How can there be a solution, though, without that mutual recognition?
Well, first of all, you have to disengage. You have to bring the killing to an end. And we had a number of golden opportunities that were totally trashed. They were not seized upon. The first was when the Palestinians, for the first time, elected a legislative council that the entire world testified was truly representative. The Israelis refused to talk to Hamas at the time.
You know the Hamas leadership very well. You've written a book about Hamas and the history of Hamas. Do you think they show any sign at all of willing to negotiate, of willing to compromise in order to negotiate?
Willing to talk about ending the conflict, yes. As early as 1994, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin offered the Israelis a truce, means a ceasefire of some sort. In order to discuss the details of the ceasefire, you have to sit down and talk with the concerned parties. The Israelis would never accept to talk.
Well, I notice you're choosing your words very carefully. Willing to talk, but does that necessarily signify willing to compromise, willing to give something?
Well, you have to talk first. Hamas has agreed in the negotiations with Fatah in 2006 that we would settle down for a Palestinian state within the borders of the 1967. And that was another opportunity that was rejected by the Americans and the Israelis.
You're off to Damascus on Wednesday for a meeting which will include the Hamas leadership. plenty of other groups as well to discuss the Middle East peace after President Bush's latest initiative. Where do you think that's going? What's this meeting supposed to achieve?
Well, this meeting was supposed originally to be held in parallel with Annapolis, but at the time the Syrians asked Hamas to postpone it. When Annapolis failed, as seen by many Arabs, the Syrians gave the green light to Hamas to convene the conference. The idea of the conference is to say this peace process that is brokered by the Americans is not the way forward. The way forward is to say, let's unite the Palestinian house first, put it in order, and talk as a united voice.
Of course, I suppose one group that's not going to be represented in Damascus is President Abbas's Fatah movement.
There will be members of Fatah who are unhappy with the way Mahmoud Abbas is taking the movement. But Mahmoud Abbas himself will not be represented.
So does that mean this meeting's trying for a united front of non-Fatah groups?
I wouldn't put it this way. I would say an anti-Annapolis front, an anti-US brokered sort of peace front.
Is that realistic, though, to try to set something up without involving Fatah? There's got to be Palestinian unity first, hasn't there, before there can be any Middle East peace?
Indeed, that's the hope. That's what Khalid Mash'al said a couple of days ago when he made an appeal to Mahmoud Abbas and said to him, let's talk. Gaza is under enormous pressure, is in enormous difficulty. This is the moment to talk unconditionally. So Hamas is always willing, remains open to talking. It's the other side who keeps coming up with American and Israeli conditions.
Do you think there can ever be a deal again with Fatah?
I doubt it, in fact, because in my opinion, Fatah is in total disarray. And those who are running the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah are no longer Fatah officials. Fayyad is not Fatah. Yasser Abdrabbo is not Fatah. Many of the people who are now running the ship or commandeering it are not really Fatah.
The trouble with all this disunity, it gives the Israelis the perfect excuse, and the Americans, I suppose it could be argued, to say, how many Palestinian groups are we meant to negotiate with? We want to negotiate with one Palestinian entity, and you're just not providing it.
Of course, disunity is a very harmful thing for the Palestinian cause, but the Palestinians have always been divided, simply because there have been all sorts of interventions from regional powers as well as international powers in order to deny the Palestinians this united position. And this has been the case for more than 20 years.
Doesn't the disunity cost you heavily in the Arab world as well? Because a lot of Arabs, I've spoken to many Arabs, and they say, how can we support the Palestinians? They can't even agree amongst themselves.
You see, Arabs seek excuses. Arabs, especially those who are loyal or who are allies of the United States of America, know exactly that the Palestinians are victims, and they know that they are supposed to support the Palestinians, but they are so cowardly, they are so weak within themselves that they come up with all sorts of excuses.
It doesn't sound very hopeful.
There is hope in the Arab masses. The Arab masses show great solidarity with the Palestinian cause, with Hamas in particular at the moment, because they do identify that Hamas is the movement that is most loyal to the cause today.